Welcome to the FarrCast, bringing you insights into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It's the 10th day of July. We're rolling into the third quarter here. 2024, half the year over with, and markets just go up. We had a great year in the first 6 months. Think about that. Great year in the first 6 months. Yes, indeed, we did. Returns are fabulous for stocks. Bonds even hanging in okay, 430 on the 10-year. That's been the longer-term average. That's been kind of the average yield for quite a while now, over the past 12 months, around a 430. So we're hovering right where we have been for a good while, and stocks keep going higher. And it's the same old, folks. The Magnificent Six or Seven, or however many you want to count, continue to go much higher than the average and equal weighted S&P 500. The average S&P 500 isn't doing much, and futures are going to do the same thing today. The futures are anyway, with the Dow futures flat to slightly negative, and NASDAQ futures, tech-heavy NASDAQ futures up over 0.25% in the pre-market. So nobody cares about where prices are, even though earnings have been trying to support where prices are. The mood on Wall Street, and particularly among investors, is one of sanguine complacency. This is okay. I'm not all that excited about it because this is just what it does. We have a couple of down days, and this thing just goes higher. My 401k seems to move up. I have more money here and there, and I should take on more risk in my portfolio. I should buy more of this risky stuff because I've forgotten what it feels like when it gets hammered. And as right, you should. What do you do when markets do this and you get into summer and you'd rather go to the beach? Hey, what I do, I talked to Jim Lebenthal from Cerity Partners, CNBC contributor, and my great friend, one of the smartest guys we ever get to talk to. Hey, Lebenthal, welcome back and good morning.
Mr. Farr, so good to see you. I haven't been on for a little while. I'm happy to be with you today.
We are very happy to have you back. We thought you were mad at us or something, which it happens a lot, really. I mean,
never mad at you, Michael. Never. Overscheduled.
We can offend anybody, I promise. And it doesn't seem like we have to try too hard. Jim, as we talk to one of the most important thing we do, the most important thing we do is talk to Fred and Ethel. The most important thing we do is not talk to fellow professionals. They're on their own. Caveat emptor. They can make. We've got a lot of folks who listen to this podcast who are not the most sophisticated, who try to pay attention to their finances. They really would like to do the right thing. They don't want to make dumb mistakes, and yet they get confused. Help unconfuse them, would you?
Sure. I think, I'm going to pick up where you were in your intro about the equal weight S&P 500, because let's first off define that index. That is a measure of the average stock experience. And the average stock experience, I'm going through the end of last week, Michael, was up 3.5%, 3.6 to be exact, percent in the year to date. So basically the first 6 months of the year. The S&P 500, as measured by the market cap weighted index, was up 16.7%. So that's a difference of 13 percentage points. And Fred and Ethel may be looking at their portfolio and saying, well, I own NVIDIA, I own Apple, I own Amazon, but maybe I don't own enough of it. Let's go back to that difference of 13 percentage points that I just spoke about for the first 6 months of the year. That is basically equal to the gap for all of 2023. And you'll remember when we got to the end of 2023, a lot of us, including me, were wringing our hands about the narrowness of the rally. The takeaway from this is that the narrowness of the rally last year has become even more pronounced this year. Now, the question, I think there's two questions. Number one, is tech going to come down in some crash-worthy fashion? I'm going to utter a simple no. I really don't think so. We can come back to that in a second because I want to elaborate further on the second point, which is what is it going to take for the rest of the market, the so-called cyclicals, industrials, materials, energy, maybe not even cyclicals, things like healthcare. What is it going to take for those stocks to start rallying, to start doing something more than that 3.6%? Here's my take on this. The actual operational results of those other companies, those non-tech darlings, the operational results have been fabulous. The market just doesn't care. Or if it doesn't care, or if it does care, it says, you know what? The economy is slowing thanks to the Fed's rate hikes, and maybe that slowdown is going to metastasize into something worse. That's the important point. The economy right now is kind of at a pivot point. We've had several weeks of lousy economic data, and the market is saying this might turn into something worse. So what do you need? You need to see, number one, profits coming in strong this second quarter, which is going to start getting reported soon. And you also need to see inflation continue to ameliorate. So here's the punchline, folks, so that the Fed can cut rates starting in September. That's where I am. This market, this economy needs rate cuts starting in September. I don't know if I'm throwing red meat in front of a lion as I say that, Michael. Let's see what you have to say.
I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we have Lebenthal on. Right there, folks. And by the way, that's why they have him on TV, because you always get, I'm going to tell you something, Jim. You always get good from Lebenthal, but that was one of the best I've ever heard from you. Succinct, it was clear, it was detailed. I'm actually going to add to it. Listen, folks. Jim and I know one thing above all others, and that is prices at some point and stock markets always come down. They always come down. Will they come down this summer? Well, Jim doesn't think that tech stocks are going to crack this summer, and maybe they don't. And indeed, if the Fed, as Jay Powell said yesterday, is looking to perhaps not leave rates high for too long and thereby cripple the economy, then the next logical place for rates to go is lower, which in fact supports those tech stocks even more. So what do I still know? I still know that the Fed makes mistakes. The mistake they make most often is staying at the party too long, keeping rates too high, too long, and that slows the economy. And Jim said we're at a pivot point. So would it shock Lebenthal or Farr if we had some sort of correction this fall? No. Maybe it'll be winter. I don't know. Lebenthal doesn't know, I promise. But neither one of us is going to panic when we see those stocks go down 10%. So what I'm telling you is, as always, listen to Lebenthal, because what he just said was brilliant. Replay it. Go back, listen to it again. He nailed it and spiked the landing, folks. See, I'm watching the Olympic trials here. I can work in anything. I can get work in anything. I can order pizza if somebody says it in my IFB. Here's the deal, as President Biden would say. See, anything. Here's the deal. Get yourself ready for it to go down. Get yourself out of this emotionally complacent stage where you just think everything's fine. Remind yourself that things do go down, and you will be one of those few who is prepared for the downturn emotionally. Say, look, this thing is way up. I started out with $10,000 in my account. I've got $25,000 in my account. When it goes back to 20,000, my head's not going to catch fire. I'm going to stay calm. I'm going to take deep breaths. I'm going to go for long walks, and I'm going to let the stock market do what it does over the long term, which is it grows wealth.
I'm going to interrupt you, Michael, because what you just said is, I'm going to interrupt you because what you just said is too important to then go on. Folks, things could get bumpy from here. Okay. There will be these questions about what's going on in the economy. There will be these questions about when and if the Fed will cut rates. There's, of course, questions about the elections, but overall, the markets go up over time. And the important thing, and I know Michael agrees with me on this, is to not try to time corrections. Michael, you almost got me in almost as a carnival barker to do. You didn't, but you almost got me into the game of when will the correction occur? Folks, nobody knows. Nobody knows, all right? There will be one, but trying to time it is absolutely a fool's errand. It's a way to really destroy your wealth on both ends when you sell out and when you get back in. So just buckle your seatbelts. It's like, Michael, you used the word complacency earlier. It's
Yep.
likely to become non-complacent in the few months ahead. We got a lot facing the world right now. But overall, this is America. The economy grows. We get through our problems. Just buckle your seatbelt. Get through it.
You know, one of the reasons, Jim, that I suggested this fall was so that listeners would take me seriously and start thinking about this now. Because if I said in the next, maybe a year from now, they'd put it off. They'd go, oh, well, I'll think about it going down later. I don't want to think about those bad thoughts now. No, make sure you're ready all the time. You know, I just read a wonderful David Brooks article. Harry, if we have a link somewhere that folks can write you on why America has gotten so mean. Why America's gotten so mean. Reggie Nair, I've referenced this before. David Brooks wrote it last summer. Brilliant, brilliant article. And the one thing he said, he quoted a prep school headmaster from the 1930s in England who said, we try to create young men who will be perfectly acceptable company at a dance and essential at a shipwreck. And I love that. I love that. So we hope to be good company to you, too, here on the FarrCast while the dance music plays. But when the shipwreck comes, we believe and we hope we can be essential to you. You can mostly be essential to yourself because if you listen to Lebenthal, the stock market grows over time, just not in straight lines. That's the message. So we stay diversified. We look to those things that haven't moved up a bunch, and perhaps it makes some sense to diversify, to take some profits, talk to your financial advisor, but follow your discipline. Don't follow your emotion, and don't just sit there and go, well, maybe I've made enough money and I'll take it out, or maybe I'll wait for a pullback. That doesn't work. The long-term discipline and plan works. Final word from Jim Lebenthal. I know he's tight on time and he's been very generous with us today. Jim, tell us what else we need to be thinking about as we go through the rest of this summer. And we're going to have you back before,
Of course. I always look forward to this, Michael. You know, you just used the word diversify, and I just want to key in on that for a second and go back to where I started. This is not a call from either me or Michael to go sell your tech stocks. You haven't heard that from us today, not at all. It is a comment, though, that outside of technology, many companies are operationally just absolutely killing it. I mean, really doing well, and their share prices are languishing. So as you think about diversifying, just bear in mind that you're diversifying into good companies with solid earnings, cleaned up balance sheets, and very attractive prices. So again, it's not a call to sell your tech stocks. It is a call to do what Michael just suggested, which is diversify.
Jim Lebenthal is a partner at Sarity Partners, CNBC contributor, and one of my best friends. Thank you, Jim, so much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come back as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Please stay with us.
Thank you for joining us this week on the FarrCast. Now it's time for political analyst Dan Mahaffee and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Joining us now, the great, the powerful wizard, Dan Mahaffee. Dan Mahaffee, Vice Chairman of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, fellow from the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, the senior political analyst on the FarrCast, knows all, sees all. Not since Karnak the Magnificent have we had this sort of prescience and insight. The aura shows up at least 10 minutes before Dan does. Welcome back, Dan.
Michael, you're building me up, and I don't even have my morning turban on yet.
Oh, that's not it? Oh, he is on video, folks. It's a little fuzzy, tough to tell. The beard's coming in even thicker, though, Dan. Very manly. Looks always good. Dan, what could we talk about each week for 7 years if we have to cover politics in Washington without boring the hell out of people? Well, Washington is the gift that keeps on giving, and Donald Trump, it wasn't on the scene when we started, but boy, oh boy, does he keep things interesting. All right. I don't know where you want to start. Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation is a manifesto about how to get rid of democracy and take over the government with all things conservative by a strict standard and iron fist. And Trump's distancing himself from it. It's a pretty scary thing. Folks, I don't make political comments on the FarrCast. I am a fiscal conservative who happens to have a heart, and I'm pretty much of a moderate when it comes to social issues. I am a registered independent, and I have voted for both Democrats and Republicans over my lifetime for every office, local and national, if I think that they're going to do the best job. So, with that said, when I tell you that this thing is nuts, it's nuts, folks. It's just nuts. So, Dan, you want to start there? Donald Trump's been on the golf course doing very well, not running his mouth. I don't know who's been talking to him, but they've done him a great service. And now, the Democrats continue to kvetch about Biden, but I can't see them doing anything. Okay, start.
Yeah, no, I think Trump is looking at an environment where the Democrats are fighting amongst themselves. The question of Biden's health, whether his campaign is flailing, all of that has, I think, drowned out anything he might want to say. And he's probably listening to that advice to stay quiet heading into the convention, use this momentum in his favor by just staying out of the headlines and keeping his powder dry for his VP pick.
Well, Churchill said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's in the middle of making a mistake."
I think he's heeded that advice. I think the one area where you do see some headlines about Trump, obviously the Project 2025. And remember, kids, that's not your grandparents' Heritage Foundation anymore. I may not have had many decades in Washington, but did know, the stories of folks like Ed Fulner and what the Heritage Foundation once was. But that organization has largely changed. And as you describe it, this Project 2025 is a rather radical blueprint, and one that even if the former president has distanced himself from it, there are quite a few folks affiliated with his past administration, as well as being on the list for any future administration who are linked to this project. So it is far from the mainstream of any kind of conservatism I've known or believed in, as well as a something that they see as a threat if they're getting so ahead of it in a way that they have to deny it now that there's more coverage about it. That said, though, if this is getting an ounce of ink, the stories about Biden's age are still getting a barrel of ink, and this is not going to be something to replace or really dent his momentum.
Stephanopoulos, who did the interview with the president last week, was caught off camera, on camera, saying no. After that interview, he didn't think that the president could serve another 4-year term, that he was just basically over his head. And then Stephanopoulos clarified, which was, instead of no comment, I don't know why these guys can't just go, I don't know what you're talking about, no comment. He said, I should not have answered that question. First is what he said. Duh, George, duh. Should not have answered that question. And my views are my views and not the views of ABC television. Okay, good luck with that, George. Why don't you?
Well, he can get a job at CYA television next. Listen here, I think the path for Biden, this has been laid bare. The number of members on the Hill who are worried not only about Biden's victory, but their own because of this is growing. And if I have to go out on a limb here with a prediction, it's that you've allowed him to have this NATO summit as perhaps a valedictory exercise. And if they had any sense and organization about this, if they were actually carrying this out, replace him next week during the Republican convention to stomp on their own, to stomp on their opponents' headlines and their control of the week.
Will Rogers, one of my favorite lines from politics. I'm not a member of any organized political party. I am a Democrat. Great. Great. And,
yes.
and don't you see it today more than ever? I mean, I think Republicans could use the same line, but he wasn't one. So no organization. Do you think there is a real chance that Joe Biden will not be the candidate for president for the Democrats?
I think there is a real chance. It's how soon does this message get through to the family members, the sister, the wife, and others who are advising him? Dr.
Give me
Jill
a
Biden,
percentage.
Valerie.
Give me a percentage, Mahaffee. What's the chance he's not on that ticket?
I put it at about 70%.
70%. He's gone. You saying 70% he's gone?
70% he's gone with the amount of conversation and backbiting you're getting in Congress right now.
I'll give it 20%. We'll see.
We'll take the other side of the bet.
It's just so complicated. It's a more Herculean task than, and I know you know this, but that the average American voter to understand how these convention works, what it takes to get on a ticket and be registered in various states, everything else, and then try and do the electoral college math with about 10 minutes to go is kind of crazy.
I get everything you're saying, Michael. I think there's a break glass attitude is starting to grow in members of the party who've seen the performance. And while the polls haven't swung too far in one direction or another, it's the state by state numbers that are really panicking them. That Virginia's tied, that New York is within single digits. That's the kind of stuff that tells you, like I said last week, states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania that are vital are already in the Trump column if you're worried about Virginia, New Mexico, and starting to worry about a close race in New York State.
Do you remember, ladies and gentlemen, Tim Russert, who would stand up with his pen and whiteboard and start to show you which states and the number of electoral college votes? Because this is really how an election is won. And Tim Russert, I think, explained it as well as anyone to the entire country. And he did it remarkably without bias. Here's just the math, folks. Dan's doing the same thing for us and saying this is a math problem that is looking more and more minute by minute insurmountable. And they're not just worried about Donald Trump winning. They're worried about governors losing. They're worried about losing the Senate and the House. They are looking at a sweep to put Donald Trump and a majority of Republicans in, and there will likely be another Supreme Court nominee from the next administration. Very likely, at least one, maybe two. So Clarence Thomas gets the opportunity to step down and another conservative goes in, but maybe one of the left-leaning justices goes, and you get a wider margin on the court, more conservative margin on the court. So it's a big deal. I just think so. Is Kamala Harris the person?
She is, because I think the discussions that are being had focus one on that you can't skip over the sitting vice president, the first Black, first female, first daughter of immigrants, vice president. You can't skip over that. And then for the reasons you described of all the legal, financial matters that would be at stake, it's the easiest to slot her in as an existing member of the ticket.
Is there a slam dunk VP candidate that you could put up underneath Kamala Harris?
Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky.
Andy Beshear. Did you notice, ladies and gentlemen, he didn't hesitate. He didn't take a breath. Why Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky?
He has shown an ability to get handily reelected again and again in a red state. He knows how to speak to folks across the socioeconomic strata and would really insulate the perception that Kamala is a coastal creature, a Washington insider, however they would want to make her seem out of touch with middle America.
Is he the guy you'd pair up against J.D. Vance?
I think he would do quite well against J.D. Vance as a counter argument to some of these solutions for what has afflicted the Rust Belt in Midwestern states.
I think this is fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you do too as you listen to this. And by the way, if you have not read Hillbilly Elegy, written by J.D. Vance, please go read it. One, it's a fabulous read. It's a great read. And if you grew up with a life of some privilege or a lot of privilege, It will give you insights into a life in America that you don't understand, and that I assure you, most of us don't appreciate. I grew up in a middle class household in the suburbs. We were not wealthy. We were not at all poor. We were just middle class. And the big night out, Dad would take us to Roy Rogers, and that would happen every couple of weeks. And it was a big deal. I have 3 sisters, and we go to Roy Rogers, and that was a lot of fun. That was the big night out. Great. It was wonderful. But this is another part of America from Appalachia, and understanding the struggles and also the narrowness and smallness of the world, the lack of opportunity, and even the perception of opportunity, which is the key, perception of opportunity, that those among our fellow citizens who are desperately poor, they don't see it. So this is great insight from J.D. Vance. And then you're going to see a triumph of a personality, of an intellect too, I think, who figured out the system. This guy, J.D. Vance, somewhere from Appalachia, figured out the system and got himself into Yale Law School and a member of Congress and now a candidate for Vice President of the United States of America. This is just a barn burner of a story. And while you might resent it and while you might want to throw rocks at it, you got to give this guy credit, folks. I mean, he figured out the rules and he's played it to a T. It's awesome. Dan, I don't know if you disagree with anything I just said. If you do,
no, I don't disagree with that. And I would just add the J.D. Vance and the other one I'm hearing a lot about, Marco Rubio. Both have that, in some ways, rags to riches story, or at least fine cloth to riches story. But they're not the same kind of typical Washington political stories. I think Trump is keen on that. He's certainly keen too on the sense that they are self-made men, as we've described. I think they have quite the age contrast with both of them compared to the other 2 candidates. Both appear will be ready to step in. The thing about Rubio, though, is you have more of that foreign policy question. And I think that's still where, as we have the NATO summit this week, somewhere where Trump is still seen as weak among voters, are voters who are concerned about the world and whether Trump would be picking more fights with our friends than our enemies.
I don't think it's going to matter, Dan. I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think that Trump makes strategic decisions like that. I think he makes decisions based on loyalty and who's going to say yes more often and yes, Mr. President, and do his bidding. And I think that guy's J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance has figured out how to work the system.
Probably why he has, I would say that's why J.D. Vance is on the top rung.
I think J.D. Vance is the guy. J.D. Vance is the guy.
But in the conversations, if he did want to, and this is, as you say, he doesn't make that decision. If you did wanted to calm that what remains of the Republican national security establishment, it would be that choice of Rubio over Vance.
I listened to Geraldo Rivera last night try and report on Leland Vittert's show, On Balance, on News Nation. It's one that I watch almost nightly. And Geraldo looked as like he was a spokesman for the Biden campaign. He's supposed to be some sort of reporter, journalist for News Nation, but boy, he didn't come across that way. And Leland Vittert, to his great credit, kept trying to hold him accountable as the guy danced and tried to keep saying nice things about Biden. And at the end, Geraldo says, listen, I'm about 6 months difference in age from President Biden, which I didn't realize he was 80 some years old. And he said, sometimes my wife has to point me in the right direction and grab my elbow, and it's not an awful thing. I was like, oh God, this is really, we're having 80-year-olds come out and speak to the capacity of other 80-year-olds.
Well, Michael, that's
perspective of their lack of capacity.
I think this is my segue to the elections we've seen around the world, in France, in Britain. No matter what you see of these candidates, they look like Muppet babies compared to ours. They are so young. They are, that one French prime ministerial candidate's 28, the other's, running in his 30s. Heck, Keir Starmer is in his 60s. That's a spring chicken compared to these folks. So it's, you have a French embryo running for office compared to us, and we look like when the Soviets had the fossils up on the Kremlin wall.
I need to be, a little bit careful here, but the one good thing about having Biden and Trump as president is I feel like a kid. I'm still in short pants compared to these guys. This is great. I love this. This is great. I'm just a youngster. Wonderful. Yes, I do remember those days where you did have everybody from Brezhnev on, and they were dying. I think 3 or 4 died during Reagan's first term, and he was on camera at one point at a breakfast press conference, early morning press conference. I was getting ready to go teach class at Pomfret School and watching the Today Show, and then comes on the president, and they asked him pointedly, they said, "Mr. President, why haven't you built a better relationship with the Russian the Soviet president?" And he said, "Listen, I've tried. I've talked to all of them, but they keep dying so fast, I don't get a chance to get to know them." At which point, some woman came right up and grabbed him by the elbow and got him the hell away from that microphone. Which, by the way, take note, President Biden, you get your ass out of there before you dig the hole any deeper. Okay, Dan, give us a final word because we got to go.
I think we look at the stories going into the convention next week. What does this convention look like? Obviously, everything in the Republican Party is sewn up. What I'm hearing from folks up in Milwaukee, not going to be the same kind of pageantry that they were anticipating, but we'll see how it goes. But look, this is the point where, again, the eyes will be back on the Republican Party after this period of Biden being in the barrel over his debate performance in that debate. VP pick, that'll be the big news. So that's what I'm looking towards.
And Nikki Haley was not invited, and she has released her delegates to Donald Trump. All right, Dan Mahaffee from the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress, the vice chairman of the Dr. Scholl Foundation. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be right back with Jenny Harrington, one of my great friends and one of the smartest people on Wall Street as well. Please stay with us. She's awesome.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. We appreciate you listening into the FarrCast this week. And now to introduce this week's special guest, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I'm Michael Farr. It's the 10th day of July. We're a little early this week. Joining me now, my wonderful friend, Jenny Harrington, Gilman Hill Advisor, CNBC contributor, vice chairman of the investment committee for a wonderful Sibley Johns Hopkins Hospital, a board member with me there, and my great buddy. Hi, Jenny. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. So good to be here.
We're so glad you're here. So glad you're here. So let's start. You were kind enough to listen to some of what Jim Lebenthal had to say in our, I thought it was a really good piece from Lebenthal. And we were talking about the differences in the market of these Magnificent Seven and the rest of the market that hasn't done anything. What did you think about it?
Well, to some degree, it was just a mic drop, right? To some degree, Jim just said everything that needed to be said, fleshed it out beautifully, explained the whole thing in what was it, like 2.5 minutes? It was perfect. But you know me, Michael, I can always expand on anything. So
Do it.
Even though Jim delivered perfection, I'll try and flesh it out a little bit more. One thing that Jim said that was really interesting was he talked about how the rest of the market outside of the top 10 have had fabulous operating earnings, have been operating fabulously, and that that's not appreciated by the overall market. I would argue a little bit that it is appreciated because they are up about 4 or 5% on the year. He was stating 3.5, so it's kind of in that range. Like the Dow's up 5, mid cap stocks are up 5, international stocks are up a little more than 5. Equal weighted, as Jim said, is up a little less than 4. So that's not nothing for 6 months, right? You extrapolate that out and you would have a normal kind of market return, 8% on a year. It's not nothing. It's just not the 16% of the S&P 500.
Yes.
And I think what's interesting is when he says they've been fabulous, they have, but they haven't been as fabulous as the top 10. And what's interesting is JP Morgan in their guide to the markets piece that you can like download for yourself online, there's a really cool slide that they put in this time. And it shows quarterly earnings by sector for the last 4 years, for the last 3 years. And what you see is starting right now, there's kind of a change in whose earnings are growing the most. So I'll give you a quick example. Technology started the year with their earnings growing 25% in the first quarter. By the fourth quarter, that becomes 16%. Still fabulous growth, but less than 25%. Then the flip side is healthcare started the year at negative earnings growth, negative 25% earnings growth. By the end of the year, their earnings should be growing by 25%. So by the end of the year, healthcare's earnings are growing faster than tech. And there's an inflection point on whose earnings are growing the fastest. And I think that's one of the things that could really lead to a leadership inflection point for the balance of the year.
Okay. But, generally what you're saying is that the underlying market is still healthy, which I think was Jim's point. Fabulous, maybe not fabulous, maybe okay, but healthy, and balance sheets still seem to be okay. And there's still an enormous amount of liquidity out there. So with that idea that you probably don't have much to do now other than maybe rebalance if the run has been so dramatic, diversify a bit and fasten your seatbelt so that when a downturn comes, whether it's soon or whether it's not, you're ready for it. And my point to Jim was you have to be ready for it emotionally, that you're ready for it to go down. And if you can keep yourself ready for the downturns emotionally, you will outperform the rest of the people who don't.
Right. Michael, on the subject of emotional, and I don't think we talked about this the last time I joined you, but I co-taught or guest taught a class at Baruch College a couple weeks ago. And I did a fun experiment with the students. I had them all send me their favorite investment quote. And then I mapped them all out on a couple of PowerPoint slides. So it was like everyone from Buffett to Graham to Alan Abelson, Marty Zweig, tons of Charlie Munger quotes came in. John Templeton, just everybody. They were great quotes. And I said to them, by the way, this was a behavioral investing class that I was co-teaching. And I said to them, what do all these quotes have in common? This is the best investment advice from the world's best investors. What does it all have in common? And it took them a minute. And I was shocked given the name of the class, behavioral investing. And what it was all the best advice from all the best investors is about behavior, which is, to your point exactly, control the emotions. Not a single piece of the best advice has to do with sourcing companies or how to value it, how to asset allocate, how to structure a portfolio. The best advice Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Ben Graham will ever give you is on your emotional state and behavior.
Other than a sense of pride and patriotism and faith in the future of America and corporate America, keep your heart and your nerves out of your investment portfolio and you'll make a hell of a lot more money. I've been saying it for 30 plus years. Jenny, the other thing, I want to do two things. I want to talk, because you and I were talking before we came on air about this idea and the counsel that we give to families, which often gets into these emotional discussions too. So I'm going to just extend from that emotional, keeping the emotions out of it, to how you work within your family and how you plan for your estates and things. And then I want to go to our institutional perspective that you and I share as we co-chair this investment committee for this fairly significant institutional account, and what we're hearing from our managers, advisors, and consultants, and what also we hear from members of our committee and their fears and concerns and observations, and how that helps guide and steer what we do. I think an institutional perspective is helpful. But you were telling me you read a fascinating tweet. Would you read it?
So just a little bit of background. For some strange reason, I have no idea why this popped up on my Twitter feed yesterday, and I actually read it. I didn't know who the poster was. This is what it says. Just wrapped a client meeting. Female, 73 and healthy, 2 kids, ages 42 and 47, 13-year-old grandson, plenty of money for comfortable retirement. The conversation was mostly focused on estate planning and encouraging her to feel okay giving money to her adult kids. Here is what I said to her. Think about life 20 years from now. You are 93, your kids are in their 60s, and your grandson is 33. They'll inherit your money. However, at that time, everyone is fairly settled into where they are and what they become. Now compare that with a gift today. Your kids are at a place in their lives where a financial gift can have a trajectory-altering impact. Consider the ripple effects of removing a bit of financial stress from the parents of a 13-year-old. I'll help ensure your needs are met for the rest of your life, but if you see an opportunity to help the people who matter to you, seize it. I read this, Michael, and I was like, boring.
Right.
Everybody knows that,
well,
right?
How many
This is
times have
exactly
you and
what
I
I say to
said
my
that?
clients.
Yeah.
If you read Morgan Housel and The Psychology of Money, like that's Morgan Housel 101. That is out there. To me, everyone in our profession, it's what we say, it's what we know to be true, blah, blah, blah. Here's what's stunning. The guy who posted it had 3,300 followers when I saw this yesterday. That post had received, when I saw it yesterday, 27,000 likes.
Wow.
By this morning, the guy's up to over 7,000 followers, and it's at 60,000 likes. Like,
so overnight, all those people in China and India decided that they like this idea of generational wealth transfer too? Great. Hey, that's good.
What is it? But here's what's so fascinating. What is it about that tweet on Twitter that's so intriguing to people? Right? To me, it's ho-hum. Like, I assume to you, it's totally ho-hum. It's what we've always talked about. Why did that catch people's attention? What is it about that?
Well,
To all your listeners, by the way, to all the listeners, like, it's ho-hum to them too. So why is this interesting to people?
I'd like to hear from our listeners. Send Harry an email. We'll talk about it again next week. Send Harry an email. Actually, I'm off next week because I'm in Europe next week. We're going to skip a week take a summer week off for the FarrCast. I'm playing golf in Ireland for a week. I can't wait. I leave Friday night. Okay, enough of a diversion here. Me and my tangents scattering off into the thin branches of meaninglessness. There's a lot that goes into counseling our clients about what they do with their wealth, if they can indeed afford to help current generations. Most are interested. Even those who can't afford it are often interested. And sometimes you have to deliver a harsher message and say, you really can't afford to pay for that tuition for your grandchild. Sometimes you can, and it's wonderful to endorse that. But part of our jobs, of course, is to do the math and help the clients. My grandmother, who died at 106 and a half, used to say and give us things, as she said, with warm hands. I want you to have this from my warm hands and not my cold hands. I want to be able to help you while I can look at your face and know that this is really what I wanted to do. I have another great friend who has 2 children. He's very wealthy, and he has done something that other clients haven't done. He's really given his children a great deal of his wealth. He did that when they were in their late 20s, which concerns a lot of folks because you think it'll spoil them or it'll disincentivize them. It'll take away the fire to grow and to achieve. It has not with these children, now 40 years old. But he said, look, if this can improve your life now and I can afford it, why should I make you wait till I die? And those are the questions that are really important. But as to the likes, I don't know. The cynical side of me says, gee, everybody who's younger liked it because they think it'd be great if their parents and grandparents gave them more money. It's a vote for the politician who's going to give you most. I don't know. I'm just being a cynic, maybe.
That's probably the right answer, but I had an interesting conversation last week with one of the investment advisors that we work with, and he said he goes to a lot of conferences because he really loves hearing how other advisors speak to their clients.
Yes.
And I wondered about that too. Like I wonder what number of those likes are because people say like, "Oh, that's so interesting," hearing how other people speak to their clients, and how much of that's not just the greedy people, sending that text or that tweet to their mom and saying, "Hey mom, you should give me some now." How much of it is people who really just want to hear how other people are talking and thinking? Because I think one of the challenges in our business, not for you and me, but for our clients, is like to some degree they're siloed. People don't like to talk about money, and I'll bet you my mom's not sitting around with all of her girlfriends saying exactly how much do you have? How are you thinking about giving it? What's your advisor saying to you? They're not having that conversation, but they're desperate for it. Just a quick aside, I had an interesting experience. Prior to the pandemic, I never had done a webinar, or anything like with a group of my clients. It was
Right.
always directly like I'm just, if something's going on, I'm just calling each person individually or emailing with each person individually. And there were always a ton of clients who would say, like, "No, honey, I'm fine. Like, I'm good. I don't need to talk, blah, blah, blah." And they were really easy, but it always made me a little uncomfortable. I'm like, "Don't you want to know more? Shouldn't you be more engaged?" And during the pandemic, things were moving so fast and furious that I started doing Zooms. And I was shocked by how many people were on the Zoom. And a huge number of them were the people who always said, "No, no, I'm good. I don't need to have a conversation." And what I realized was they were kind of the voyeurs. They were nervous about asking questions. They didn't want to ask them directly because they didn't want to seem stupid, but they were kind of desperate to have to hear the conversation, not to have the conversation, but to hear the conversation. And so I think that tweet was, could be the less cynical side of us could say that's a reflection too of people wanting, people getting an insight into how conversations go.
Yeah.
Real conversations.
Absolutely fascinating. And if you are a wealth manager and you engage in the sort of financial planning and advice side of this business, and you're not just an asset fund manager where you just strictly concern yourself with stocks, these are important conversations. And I think probably part of the best value that clients get from a wealth manager who really does understand these intricate family issues and understands the legal and tax implications of this, trying to enable and help the sort of things that people want to do and live their lives with their wealth and benefit their families and everything else. And like, for instance, you can pay any amount to educate another person to an educational institution or another person's medical bills without incurring gift tax, as long as you pay it directly to the institution. Write your check directly to the college or to the hospital, and that does it. No gift tax. So little things that we can be helpful with.
Can I riff off of that? Because this actually brings up you and Jim and the behavior that we were talking about initially when you said the best value is in the advisor. And I think we've talked about this before, but I will always come back to this. It does not matter in the long term if your portfolio return on average is 8%, 8.75, or 7.25. What matters the most is that you're not cashing out in March and April of 2020. And to that point, like that's also where the advisor adds a lifetime of value in 2 months is that behavioral, the whole picture, the behavioral help, the behavioral assist on that. So yeah, I think the advisor is worth worth the fee.
Well, so much of the time we save clients from themselves, and it's not because they're stupid. I don't have stupid clients. They're emotional. And emotional is very understandable. I'm emotional, but I've learned to steel myself against it, and I include you behind my emotional walls, protect those clients, a bit like the mother hen spreading her wings. That's what we do. Jenny, if we look towards institutions and what institutions have been going through and their experience and what they're hearing from their advisors, what insights do you have from this rather large portfolio? I've been managing on this committee for 20 plus years, and you now for what, 5 years now? Have we sucked you in for 5 years?
Oh.
Well, listen,
You know what I
ladies and
think?
gentlemen, I met Jenny Harrington and I said, I'm on this committee and we're managing this big pool of money. I need to get Jenny. I need that brain down on this committee. And so she travels to Washington and now sits on the board, and she's wonderful to do it. This to help. Look, this is just charity. We don't get paid. We don't do that. But Jenny just says yes. If you want to find a cool person who says yes, who can really make a difference, that's my friend Jenny. Sorry, Jenny.
Because Jenny's such a nerd that it's her idea of the best time ever to get to see how a billion and change is properly managed. But you know what, Michael?
Yeah, she's not wrong about that. It is really that if this is a good time for you, you are kind of nerdy. That's true.
But you know what's interesting about that question is it goes back to exactly what we're talking about. If you ask me what's different at the institutional level, or what I've learned at the institutional level, is institutions are better at stripping out emotion than individuals. And it might actually go back to that tweet. Like, if I'm right that a large part of those 60,000 likes are because individuals are siloed in their conversations, institutions are not. And the beauty of sitting on that investment committee is there's, how many of us are there? 15-ish?
Yep.
Super, super, super smart investment professionals who bat everything around, plus the consultant. And when you do that, you strip out the emotion. So this week alone, I've had 2 conversations with clients who are freaking out about the election. And one of them's decided to sit on nearly $2 million cash for fear that we're going to have an autocracy, come to pass in November. That is irrational and that is emotional. But that client is in her own like narrow silo that she can't escape because she doesn't get to sit on the big investment committee and have highbrow intellectual conversations. So I think that's really the beauty of the institutions is they're able to strip out the emotion. And you don't see that. I mean, even just to change an asset allocation at the institutional level involves a rewrite of the investment policy statement. And the investment policies lay out like we will do this here, we will do that then, we will focus on the long term. Individuals don't have that, or even if they do have their own IPS, they can change it whenever they want. They don't need to go through layers and layers of checks and balances to keep the long-term strategic investment plan on track.
Yeah, we actually do that. We have the individual investment policy statement. We'll pull it out and say, are we on track? Here were the goals. Here's what's happening. Often when people think that that they're dissatisfied and they go, oh, I think in a market like this, of course, they want more risk because everything has been going up, and they'll say, well, why don't we take on more risk? We could be doing better. And you have to point out, you don't need to be doing better. This is not a time to be greedy. The market's making new highs. If anything, it's a time to be more defensive. So all of these things that we know that are often counterintuitive still work. Project 2025, by the way, out of the Heritage Foundation, I think is shocking. And your client's not crazy to be that concerned, but tell her this story. In September or October, just as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were coming up to the election, I had a client with a 20 some odd $1 million portfolio at the time who called and said, I think it's going to be disastrous if Trump gets elected. I think Trump could get elected. I want to hedge my portfolio. What will it cost me to hedge my portfolio for the next 6 months? And I came up with a strategy that was going to cost him about $125,000 to $150,000. He said, and what happens if I buy those puts and I buy that insurance and everything, and nothing happens over the next 6 months? I said, well, they expire worthless if things go up, and you will have just wait. You will have, it'll cost you $125,000 to $150,000. It's like buying, insurance, life insurance, and not dying. I mean, that's what happens. And of course, everybody pretty much at the time was in agreement that Donald Trump was going to be a shock and that markets were going to go down. And CNBC had me up all night, had me stay awake that night. They had me on the phone and by a camera, 1 a.m, 2 a.m, as poll results are coming in. Harry will remember this. And futures were up 900 points. 900 points, exactly the opposite of every piece of market wisdom, of expert wisdom from both politicians and market people that you would expect. So you can read the tea leaves right and still get the market reaction dead wrong, and it can be very, very expensive. Long-term, stock markets go up. Through good times and bad times, they get volatile, but they go up. And Warren Buffett will tell you there's nothing wrong with getting rich slowly. Final word, Jenny Harrington, please.
Okay, thanks. I was gearing up for it. So here's my Fred and Ethel. I'm going to read you the last sentence. I'm going to read you the last sentence of what I've been putting in my note to clients with their quarterly reviews. Okay. We think that the presidential election will inject incredible noise and anxiety into the investment landscape, but ultimately history will repeat itself and the innovation and strength of U.S. business will triumph over the weakness and self-interest of politicians. So there you go.
That's it. That's all you need to know. So
thank you.
Lebenthal, Mahaffee, Jenny Harrington. I'm smarter for having listened to these folks today. I hope you are too. Jenny Harrington, Gilman Hill Advisor, CNBC contributor, my great friend, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us on another FarrCast as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. For our producer, Harry Jennings, Hightower Advisors, Farr Miller in Washington, thanks so much for being with us. Please share us on your social media. If you want to see that tax report, send Harry Jennings, hjennings@farrmiller.com, an email. We're off next week. We'll be back the following week. Thank you. For the FarrCast, I'm Michael Farr. Have a great weekend and week. Bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on the FarrCast, and thanks to our guests, Jim Lebenthal, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Jenny Harrington. We hope you enjoy the show as much as we enjoy making it for you. I'm proud of the work we've done and the quality of shows we have produced over the past 7 years, and honestly, I think this week's might be our best. Please share us with friends and colleagues. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Stream past episodes and subscribe so you never miss a new one. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And as always, if we can be of assistance at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. We are here to help, and I'm happy to arrange for any of our listeners an appointment with one of our financial professionals to review your portfolio, your needs, and your goals. We love reading all of your notes and try to reply to as many as we can. You can reach us at hjennings@farrmiller.com. Let us know any questions you have about past episodes or questions you'd like us to address in upcoming shows. We are scheduled off next week, but we'll have a new show for you with more great guests coming up in 2 weeks. Until then, take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. And thanks for listening to the FarrCast. Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and SEC registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.